I'm Dan Mercedes, and this is Orion Doctrine. Today we're talking about behavioral constraint in autonomous systems, not monitoring what agents do after the fact, but stopping accumulation before it becomes irreversible. Single transaction enforcement is necessary but insufficient for autonomous systems. The authority gate constrains individual state mutations. The immutable receipt service attests to each decision. But autonomous systems do not fail only at the transaction level. They fail through accumulation. Agents do not merely execute actions, they develop behavioral trajectories. Over time, frequency increases, scope expands, context drifts, and authority boundaries blur. What began as a permitted action sequence can evolve into systemic deviation. The drift guard exists to constrain that evolution. It evaluates behavioral sequences, not isolated transactions, and enforces bounded velocity, frequency, and semantic trajectory to prevent irreversible state mutation. Governance must operate not only at the moment of mutation, but across time. Let me slow that down. There is a categorical difference between monitoring behavior and constraining it. Traditional observability systems operate after mutation. They log anomalous database, writes, privilege escalations, or outbound transfers once those events have already occurred. Damage accumulates before human intervention. The system reacts to consequences. This is not enforcement. It is observation. The drift guard operates strictly before irreversible mutation. It runs in a parallel enforcement loop alongside the authority gate, maintaining stateful behavioral context across requests. Rather than asking whether a single action is permitted, it asks whether this sequence of actions is still within bounded behavioral tolerance. When defined variance exceeds policy-defined thresholds, whether in velocity, semantic divergence, privilege usage, or contextual drift, execution is suspended immediately. No mutation occurs while behavior is being reassessed. Monitoring watches. Constraint intervenes. Here's where it gets interesting. Agent authority is not static. Standing privileges introduce compounding systemic risk. Long-lived tokens, persistent roles, or static capability grants create an expanding attack surface, especially when agents operate continuously. The drift guard enforces authority decay. Permissions decay based on time elapsed since last explicit, reauthorization, token consumption, or cumulative action weight. Context shift across operational domains, and escalation frequency or privilege amplification patterns. When thresholds are crossed, privileges invalidate automatically. Reauthorization is required. Authority becomes time-bound and behavior-sensitive rather than permanent and assumed. This prevents gradual privilege, creep, a common failure mode in autonomous execution systems. Think about what that actually means. An agent that starts with narrow permissions and executes reliably for hours can still represent growing risk. Each action consumes authority. Each context shift accumulates drift. The system doesn't wait for catastrophic failure to respond. It attenuates authority in real time. Not all mutations are equal. Some actions are reversible, others are catastrophic. Certain mutations carry catastrophic risk and require pre-commit gating. High-risk, irreversible mutations include database deletion, infrastructure decommissioning, privilege escalation, financial transfer, and security policy alteration. These require pre-commit gating. Before mutation, the control plane may require multi-party authorization or explicit step-up authentication. Declarative policy defines the quorum requirement and enforces a bounded halt window during which the agent's memory state remains frozen. The system does not trust continuous autonomy for irreversible change. Irreversible mutations demand human-backed constraint. This is not a failure of automation. It is recognition that autonomy must operate within a bounded envelope, and certain actions exceed that envelope by definition. To maintain audit defensibility, behavioral enforcement must be deterministic and recorded. Enforcement occurs in a parallel enforcement loop operating alongside the authority gate, maintaining stateful behavioral context across requests. When enforcement triggers, execution privileges are suspended pending escalation. The agent's state is frozen. No additional mutation proceeds. Drift intervention events are recorded as structured enforcement records, tied to the evaluated behavioral state, policy version, and threshold condition. Behavioral variance is not merely detected. It is constrained and attested. This ensures that governance operates across time, not just at isolated decision points. But here's the objection. Doesn't this introduce unacceptable latency? If every action requires behavioral context evaluation, doesn't that slow execution to the point where autonomy loses value? The answer is no, if the system is architected correctly. Behavioral evaluation runs in parallel, not serially. The drift guard maintains context asynchronously and only blocks execution when thresholds are breached. The vast majority of transactions proceed without intervention. The system optimizes for velocity within bounded envelopes, not velocity at all costs. Latency is acceptable when it prevents catastrophic mutation. If governance cannot constrain behavior over time, it cannot prevent catastrophic state mutation. Transaction-level control is necessary. Behavioral constraint is mandatory. Without it, autonomy compounds risk faster than policy can respond. Build systems that enforce behavioral boundaries before accumulation becomes irreversible. Governance isn't only about the moment of decision, it's about the trajectory between decisions. That's the doctrine.